Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/Entitled Parents. In today's episode, an entitled mother rips open the doors on my ambulance, and it does not end well for her. An entitled mother rips open the doors on my ambulance, and it does not end well for her. Update. Entitled mother sighting at water park. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. An entitled mother rips open the doors on my ambulance, and it does not end well for her. So, this just happened last night, and I still can't believe someone would do this. I'm a 30M and a paramedic. I've been in EMS for the past 8 years, and I absolutely love my job. Last night, we were dispatched to a 75-year-old female who fell at home. The patient stated that she tripped over her carpet and hit her head when she fell. We arrived on the scene and noticed that the home was a duplex with our patient's door on the right and her neighbor's door on the left. We made our way into the home and found her lying on the floor. The woman was awake and breathing. We started asking her the standard questions: "Are you okay? Does anything hurt? Do you remember the fall? ECT. She stated that she has a pounding headache and that she remembers walking to bed and then waking up on the floor. In my field, that's a pretty big red flag. We noticed that she's got a pretty good lump on the side of her head and a big bruise starting to form already. Noticing the bruise, I asked her if she was on any blood thinners. She said that she was on blood thinners for a previous stroke she had a few years ago. We urged her to let us take her to the hospital because there was a possibility that the fall could have caused a bleed in her brain, and she should go to the hospital to get some scans done. She agrees, and we begin to package her up. We applied a C-collar around her neck in case of any C-spine, neck, injuries. She denied any neck or back pain, so we lifted her up and placed her on our stair chair. A stair chair is exactly what it sounds like. It's a chair with tracks that we use to carry patients up and down stairs. As we were getting her out of the house, her neighbor whipped the door open and started yelling about how she couldn't sleep with all the lights and noises outside. The sound of the stair chair apparently woke her up, and she was not happy about that. My lieutenant walked over to her and apologized and said that we were dealing with a medical emergency and that we would be leaving soon enough. The Karen neighbor then noticed that our patient was her neighbor, and that's when she started yelling about something totally different. The entitled neighbor started yelling, "You can't take her to the hospital. I have errands to run tomorrow, and she needs to watch my kids." My lieutenant again reiterated that we were here for a medical emergency and that her health is more important than her errands. The entitled neighbor let out a loud huff and then slammed the door in his face. We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong. After a few minutes in the back of the ambulance, we told our lieutenant that he could take the engine crew back to the station and that we were going to be heading out in a few minutes. After we checked her vitals, got in 4 going, and started giving her 4 fluids, my partner got out of the back and went up to the driver's seat. About 5 seconds later, the back doors of my ambulance fly open, and who do I see? The entitled neighbor, of course. Apparently, she needed a few minutes to get dressed before coming outside. I yell at her, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She yells back, "I told you that she can't go to the hospital because she has to watch my kids tomorrow." She then starts trying to pull the cot out of the ambulance with our patient on it. Luckily, she didn't know how to unlatch the cot and couldn't get her out. Our patient says, "I can't watch your kids tomorrow because I fell, and I might be having a stroke." The entitled neighbor yells back at her and says, "You're fine. You don't need to go to the hospital because you're not having a stroke." My partner then hears the commotion and goes to the back of the ambulance. He pulls her off the cot, and I slam and lock the doors. You could tell that the entitled neighbor was about to become combative. It's important to know that either the police department or the sheriff's department responds to our calls, too, when it's at night. Because of where we were, it took a few minutes for the sheriff's department to show up on scene, but he got there just in time. I couldn't hear much through the door, but I saw the officer get out of his cruiser with his taser drawn. My partner runs back up to the driver's seat and starts heading to the hospital. The last thing I saw through the back windows was the entitled neighbor stomping towards the officer and then her hitting the ground after being tossed. Super satisfying to watch. I was talking with my patient and asked what that was all about, and she said that the entitled neighbor will just drop her 3 young kids off at her house and leave for several hours at a time with no notice. My patient had no idea that she was supposed to watch the kids at all because, again, the entitled neighbor never even gives her a heads up about these things. Like I said in the beginning, this happened last night, so I don't have any updates, but I'll post an update when I learn more. Small update: my contact at the hospital said that the patient does not have a bleed. She does, however, have a really nasty looking bruise on her face from the blood thinners. It's incredibly common. She will most likely be going home soon. There is no update on the neighbor. I probably will not hear anything back until my next shift day. Update: hey everyone, sorry for the late update. Unfortunately, it's not as exciting as some of you would hope for. So, I got in touch with the officer on that call, and he said that the woman was not formally charged with anything. The patient is back home now and resting comfortably. Like I said before, the hospital found no signs of a bleed, and she was discharged the next day. She was advised to file for an order of protection from the neighbor, but I don't believe I will ever be privy to that information unless something happens again. I read a majority of the comments, and most people are saying to contact Elder Abuse and DCFS. The only problem with filing those reports is having concrete proof. We never actually saw any children, so we can't really say that they are abused or neglected at all. We can say that we have a suspicion, but for all we know, they could be living their best lives at home with the entitled parent. If the entitled parent had left and abandoned her kids, then that's another story. Calling DCFS without any signs of child abuse and just working off hearsay can just cause more problems if the accusations are unfounded. The same can pretty much be applied about the elder abuse. We have no actual proof of elder abuse occurring. The entitled neighbor was not involved in the actual fall, and there was no suspicion for any kind of financial, physical, emotional, or social abuse. The way our patient talked about the kids getting dumped on her was in more of an inconsiderate way and not in an abusive way. Long story short, the entitled neighbor was just kind of an asshole. I am, however, hoping that the patient press charges for assault, but I don't know if she will. Wow. The poor lady. She is hardcore getting taken advantage of. My parents are that age, and I don't even let them watch my one child without me present, because I don't want anything to happen and I don't want to wear them out. This poor lady needs to GTF away from the crazy neighbor. That's abuse. No, the crazy neighbor has to GTF away from everyone. Even her kids shouldn't be near her. I think being taken advantage of is putting it lightly. She is being bullied. You should tell her that next time just phone the police and let them know her neighbor abandoned her children. Is the neighbor going on your call the police list? EMT I used to know told me about this. His company keeps a list of all locations that require police notification because the company doesn't want their crews exposed to the locals. This could be because the neighbors are like this one or because there is a drug house in the area and they want to make sure their rig isn't stolen/broken into. PSA: I'm not gonna tell anyone not to steal an ambulance. I do however urge the public to steal ambulances from ambulance stations or ambulance barns. Stealing an ambulance that is in use puts your neighbors and the unwell at risk of injury or death. This concludes my public service announcement. There's at least one person with a serious brain injury, and it wasn't your patient. Oh my! I'd imagine that if the roles were reversed and the EM was the one who fell and got hurt, she'd still be trying to drop off her kids with her neighbor saying, "It's an emergency. You must take care of my kids. I might die if I don't go to the hospital." It may not have ended well for her, but I'm glad you got your patient safely to the hospital. And hopefully she's alright with no severe injuries and the police don't release the EM without consequences. Well, to be fair, if my neighbor has to go to the hospital in the middle of the night, that's the kind of situation it's acceptable to ask me to watch her kids with no notice. Asking for help doesn't make you entitled. Christ. At this point, doesn't the EP's behavior constitute elder abuse as well as child neglect? I'd be checking in with the cops to make sure they know the full situation on this one. Oh my word, sounds like the neighbor was/is on drugs. I can't believe that there are people with that kind of mentality living amongst us. OMG. Hope your patient's okay. Unlikely you can communicate this to her as you'd be on other calls today, but she needs to call up the police for child abandonment the next time her neighbor drops the kids off at her house. Maybe talk to the social worker at the hospital. That sounds like elder abuse as well as child endangerment. An entitled mother rips open the doors on my ambulance, and it does not end well for her. Update. Hey everyone, sorry for the late update. Unfortunately, it's not as exciting as some of you would hope for. So, I got in touch with the officer on that call, and he said that the woman was not formally charged with anything. The patient is back home now and resting comfortably. Like I said before, the hospital found no signs of a bleed, and she was discharged the next day. She was advised to file for an order of protection from the neighbor, but I don't believe I will ever be privy to that information unless something happens again. I read a majority of the comments, and most people are saying to contact Elder Abuse and DCFS. The only problem with filing those reports is having concrete proof. We never actually saw any children, so we can't really say that they are abused or neglected at all. We can say that we have a suspicion, but for all we know, they could be living their best lives at home with the entitled parent. If the entitled parent had left and abandoned her kids, then that's another story. Calling DCFS without any signs of child abuse and just working off hearsay can just cause more problems if the accusations are unfounded. The same can pretty much be applied about the elder abuse. We have no actual proof of elder abuse occurring. The entitled neighbor was not involved in the actual fall, and there was no suspicion for any kind of financial, physical, emotional, or social abuse. The way our patient talked about the kids getting dumped on her was in more of an inconsiderate way and not in an abusive way. Long story short, the entitled neighbor was just kind of an asshole. I am, however, hoping that the patient press charges for assault, but I don't know if she will. I'm not criticizing in the least. I'm very well aware that the government sticking their nose in can be a pain. I know this from experience. I understand where you are coming from. However, that being said, if you suspect child or elder abuse, report it. Don't wait for proof. In most cases, especially elder abuse, the abuser is an expert at hiding it. I wouldn't normally advocate reporting without evidence, but in cases of abuse, if you wait to obtain evidence, it could end up too late to save the victim. Even without evidence, you can report anonymously, someone will investigate and perhaps find the evidence that can stop the abuse. Again, I'm not attacking, I'm just saying that in cases of suspected abuse, reported suspicions can save someone's life. You don't need concrete proof to make a report of child abuse or neglect. You need to have a reasonable belief that a child is, or has been, mistreated. As CPS, it's our job to investigate. That's not on you. Please make a report and consider making an Adult Protective Services report for your friend as well. There may be resources in your area that could be really useful to her that she may not even think about. Isn't there some risk involved for folks who are mandated reporters not reporting? I know it's a bit easier to track and reprimand in school settings, but aren't EMS and fire mandated reporters in most states as well? I wish that ending was more satisfying than she wasn't formally charged. You sound like an experienced EMT, and have probably seen crazy a lot and then some. If there's an alarm bell ringing in the back of your mind, it's your intuition telling you something. I don't know how reporting stuff works, but maybe something could be done. Don't worry, what goes around comes around. That lady is going to meet karma soon. It's just a shame that you probably won't hear about it. Also, I am in no way qualified to give legal advice, but I think you should report it so someone if you suspect child or elder abuse, even without proof. It wouldn't hurt to have someone investigate, right? Entitled Mother Sighting at Water Park. This is a short but sweet story. A good friend of mine and I visited lots of amusement parks and water parks in the summertime in our teens. He was afraid of the larger water slides but was thrilled to ride them as long as I accompanied him. They had double-seating inner tubes and my friend and I shared one and would patiently wait our turn if one wasn't readily available. After getting off of one of the many slides, we saw two small children trying to pick up one of the double tubes to ride in. Cue entitled Mother. A woman in her mid-30s? I believe, with a child that looked barely older than 2, no thoughts behind this toddler's eyes, mind you, swiftly approached these two kids and snatched the tube right out of their little hands. "We've been waiting too long for one," was what this lady said to these mortified 6 to 7-year-olds. She then dragged the tube off with her toddler in her other arm. My friend and I both saw this unfold, and unfortunately weren't able to intervene in time, but we gave our inner tube to the younger children so that they could still enjoy the water slide. We both agree that you have to be a pretty big scumbag to rip something out of a child's hands if that child is within their rights to use said thing. Moral of the story: waiting a few extra minutes won't kill you. Unfortunately, some parents think the world revolves around them and everyone else is their babysitter. Had an encounter with a child at water safari whose mother dumped her at the water park. It had a giant log that would fill with water and then dump every so often. I asked her where her mom was and she shrugged. Even the lifeguard on duty didn't know. Saw the kid later with Hiram and dad. Mom was clearly drunk and dad looked about done. It was really nice of you to make sure those kids still got to have fun. Sadly, not a lot of people would do that. This reminds me of the time I was chilling on a bench in a park and this dad went to some kids, not older than 9 probably, swinging in one of those big round swings and proceeded to scold them because they've been on it for far too long so his 12-plus daughter can swing. Mind you, the classic swings were free and she could have swung on those. The level of entitledness some people can have is beyond my comprehension. I remember those tubes. Took my preteen daughter to a water park, so we rode down on a double tube. We quickly figured out that if we both leaned back, we'd go much faster. It was all fun until we went so fast we completely flipped over halfway down. Ouch. Well, some people are complete scumbags. There's the real moral to the story. I couldn't imagine doing that to an adult, let alone children. She did it to the children specifically because she knew there'd be no resistance. She's a bully. You two did good in the karma department that day. It's nice that you were so kind to those kids. That reminds me of this woman that forced the baseball out of a little girl's hand at a baseball game. It was caught on camera. SMH. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.